I'll maybe just set the scene in terms of how we see the topic of trust at CCS Insight. So I think it's been mentioned that we're tracking this market in a fair amount of detail, and what we see in our data is the refurbished smartphone market maybe sold around 120 million units last year, right? And on top of that, you've got the used phone market, which is maybe another 200 million. And depending on the country, that split between the used market and a refurbished device splits very, very differently. But it's a good market. Everyone knows that this market, I think everyone knows that it's growing quicker than the primary market, which is getting all the carriers, all the OEMs kind of looking at this market in quite a lot of detail. But the market grew 4% last year, which isn't that exciting, really, is it? You kind of hope that this refurbished market is kind of taking off a little bit more than that. But fundamentally, what it comes down to, when you do industry research, you do consumer research, the top reason that the market isn't bigger is supply, because, US is super unique because you guys tend to trade your devices in at the end of the contract life. But in most parts of the world, that's just still a very alien concept. So trade-in is very, very low, supply is low, and if it was higher, the market would be much higher. But when you look at all the research that we're conducting beyond that supply point, it really comes down to trust. It really does come down to people not knowing what they're buying. And again, that level of trust differs very much country by country. So the more advanced circular markets like the UK, US to a degree, there is that element of trust, but in many markets, there's just not that trust. So trust is a huge point. I would say there is another kind of element within this market that I think will be touched on, is the kind of the rogue element of this industry. Some people call it the dirty part of this industry, the unprofessional part of this industry. And I think some of the themes we're going to be talking about are all about that. Obviously, those 2 points overlap with one another if you have a kind of rogue industry that affects trust a little bit. But anyway, these are some of the topics that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to say one other thing as well before we kind of kick the discussion off. This industry is probably, as of like now, is at a really, really, really interesting point, because some of you are probably following this memory crisis shortage. And it's spiraling out of control. I mean, it is properly spiraling out of control, where the cost of chips, if you're a hyperscaler buying chips for your cloud servers, they are telling their procurement guys there's no limit on cost. You pay whatever you have to get those NAND chips and those DRAM chips. Handset OEMs can't afford these chips. They just can't. And what we're going to see by the end of this year is that sort of under $300, under $500 segment be almost wiped out. Like literally be wiped out. So what you've got is an industry that's considering two things. How do you make those more expensive devices affordable? But the other thing you're saying is, let's let refurbished devices fill that price gap, because the sweet spot for refurbished is under $500, $300-400, something like that. So this is a really, really pivotal time, and the industry, operators across the world, OEMs across the world, and the large retailers across the world are suddenly looking at how you address this, and refurbished is front and center. But the trust point is front and center of that as well for all the companies that are in this. And really pleased to be joined by Braden, Dami, and Daniel on this, each with different perspectives in terms of consumer perspective, in terms of dealing with consumers for many years. And I must say the TELUS model is an example to a lot of the world in terms of how you address circularity at retail and with consumers. Dami, obviously fantastic experience working with a number of customers within Apkudo. And Daniel, you highlighted your kind of global experience trading devices and managing circular supply chains across different regions. So let's touch on the topic of trust then. When you think about the data when you receive a device, whether it be trade-in, acquisition, B2B, or whatever, how often do you actually trust that data? I'll start with you, Brendan. You're next to me.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we never trust the data, meaning we reprocess the device actually 2 or 3 different times throughout our own process just to make sure we know exactly what we have, and depending on who we got it from and who it's going to, we want to make sure that we know exactly the state of the product. And then I would say the trust that we see persists both from a B2B perspective as well as a B2C perspective. There's trust issues on the front end, on the intake. Customers don't trust that they're getting fair value for their device. They don't trust that the data has been successfully wiped. They don't even trust that if they need a backup phone that they can get a quality backup phone. And I think a lot of those reasons prevent the intake from happening in the first place. But yeah, even when we source product from partners, we ultimately feel like we have to run it through the process again and just verify what we got.
And out of interest then, when you are selling on devices, do you sense that trust isn't there again? You know, you're saying, well, come on, trust me. I'm selling you good stuff here of the right grade, but there is still this sense of they need to retest it again, I guess.
Yeah, so we resell B2B and B2C. The B2C story has actually been much easier because we're selling these devices for the most part back to the next end user, which is a great opportunity for us. And we've stood behind the trust issue with a limited lifetime warranty that we launched last year. So it's a defect warranty. It's just meant to offer confidence to the end customer that are buying our products. But yeah, from a B2B perspective, we found that communicating exactly what we have and what it is the primary challenge that we have in the wholesale market.
Okay, thanks very much. Dami, obviously, you're in a kind of different situation, but maybe some anecdotes you hear in terms of companies that you deal with in terms of that trust factor when people are handling data?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Braden just said, there is a lack of trust whenever devices coming in to the warehouse, but also customers that are looking to purchase a device, whether that's through a store or online. There's just always heavy skepticism when either making that decision from a consumer side or when you're receiving it. I think what we've been able to do is close the time and the gap that it takes to then trust the device that you're purchasing or receiving. So whether that's having historical data or media or images or videos that you can quickly tap into to verify and increase that trust rapidly versus in the past, you had to go and rerun things several times over and over again. And kind of the way that we're moving is just getting you to that trust faster. And hopefully we can do that higher and higher upstream. So that's what we've kind of been seeing.
Great, thank you. Daniel, I know you've experienced good and bad and some very bad. And I don't know how much you want to share on this panel, but maybe you can share some of your experiences in terms of how you trust data that you receive from companies.
Yeah, I think, well, I won't trust anyone. 25 years in the business, and there were people, and I think many people in this room will agree that there are people that we've all trusted at various points and times, and they have managed to break that trust. I think there's two key problems. I think the first problem, if you look at a consumer trading a device in, they're going to trade anything in. They're going to say that they're going to click all the boxes and say it's the best possible phone or tablet that it could be, and then it's going to get to wherever that processing facility is. That's where I see the first part of the issue, is you have people that are just trying their luck to get as much money as they can for that phone. The second part of the problem is that whomever is processing that, and I personally have noticed massive difference with, and I wasn't paid to say this, but with Apkudo's technology, and I won't name networks, but I buy from a lot of them, and there's certain product that I know goes through this technology versus product that doesn't, and there is a very distinctive difference. So I think part of the challenge that we face is we can't believe anything we read, and then the recourse that you try and have with these people is just a constant fight. And a lot of the time you end up in litigation trying to get money back because it's been misrepresented. And I think there's this mentality that because they're so big, that we're just going to go away. And in other parts of the world where we operate, I can say that I could supply phones out of Australia, the UK, Spain, Norway, and I could sell them to you as a C-grade phone. The price that you'll give me based on your perception of what that is here will be very, very low. And then when I would say to someone, you're way too low on that price, if I shipped those phones in, someone's going to go and market that same product and just put an A sticker on it. So there's just no consistency. And sadly for me, what I've noticed here is that with the exception of some, and probably it's because of the sheer size of the market in the US, this is where the problem seems to be the biggest. And if,
Can I just check on that? And do you think it's because they are so powerful as sellers, because they have so much volume and they can kind of...
I think that there's a big market to feed, and I think if they lose one person, there's someone standing right behind them that's gonna take that. But I certainly think the more discussions like this that can happen, and the more that we can see of this type of technology, it's going to make a huge difference. Some of the quality issues that I've observed, you just wouldn't get away with that down in Australia or New Zealand. It wouldn't happen. So I think that there's this sort of wide gap where people can just do that. And I think it's just going to come down to more people need to complain about it to affect change.
Yeah, makes sense. And out of interest, do you sense that a situation is getting worse? Because there's so much, and this is maybe open to anyone, but there's so much demand for this product, and relatively few sources of people selling it to the trade. Is it becoming a worse problem? Obviously, with automation, robotics, it will be getting better at that level. But I don't know. Do you sense it's getting worse in terms of the trust in the data, or getting better?
I think the secondary market is, for a very long time, was observed as kind of that backyard trader, grey market sort of business, and it really now, I think, is up there with the primary market. So there's room to put the secondary market and the primary market side by side. But I think the only way that's going to work is with this type of technology, and you have to be able to remove the rogue element where they're, I mean, I think the whole device passport thing is, it's a poor analogy, but back where I'm from, Toyota are quite big in their used cars, and they will bring cars back into the country and they'll put a little sticker on the back saying a Toyota signature class, and it's gone through like a 500-point check, and you know that you can buy that with some level of comfort that if anything goes wrong with it, they're going to back it up. And I think that's sort of part of the problem as a wholesaler when you're buying large volumes of product, having the ability to say this is not what you said it was. So I think the more people buy into this type of technology, and if they're prepared to pay for that reassurance, it hopefully won't get worse, but there is a cost to... I personally am happy to pay that cost to have that reassurance.
Yeah.
Because it's less of a headache than not.
Understood. From sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, from a consumer standpoint, I like what you mentioned, because the secondary market, from a customer perspective, the expectations are almost the same as a primary market today. So it used to be kind of like, I'll buy something off of Craigslist or something, and I'll just hope for the best. But now the expectation is almost the same. I want the quality of my brand new phone to be the same as the quality of the used one. So I think it's becoming a bigger problem just because the goalposts and the expectations from a quality perspective have risen so much from a customer perspective, and
Yeah,
that's where we help.
makes sense. And I guess trusting data that you get from consumers is a challenge. To the point you highlighted, people kind of tick the box, say, yeah, it's a perfect condition, and it's got, you know, completely smashed screen or whatever. How do you manage that from a consumer perspective, in the sense of, you know, looking after your NPS score and so on? But I mean, you do in-store and online. How does that differ in terms of being able to trust what consumers are telling you, and how do you manage that point?
Yeah, well, we have trust issues with consumers, but also our retail sales reps, because the motivations with them to get the grading right just isn't there. They don't want to have an awkward conversation with the customer they're trying to sell wireless services to. So what we've done is we've tried to empower the customer with omni-channel and self-serve capabilities to diagnose the device that they have, troubleshoot the device that they have, as well as start their device return journey themselves in our TELUS app. So what we're trying to do is take the grading and value decision out of the rep's hands and also out of the customer's hands, and just try to render an unbiased opinion based on the diagnostic tools that we've put in. So we've got self-serve tools that customers can use. Those same tools are available in our retail stores. There's a omni-channel capability so they can start at home, resume it in store. But now what we're trying to do, because we're a bit unique, as you mentioned, that the value of the customer from a pure telco perspective also needs to be considered in how harsh we want to treat the device on intake. What we're trying to do is layer in the value of the customer before we render the final decision on the price of the device. So the device is what it is. It's just how harsh we are with the customer is going to vary based on their value to us.
Okay, thanks very much. Before I move on to the topic of DPP, just from a regional perspective, you highlighted the US, some challenges there in terms of trust in the data. Any other kind of regional observations, where Europe sits, for example? Is there any other, any ideas, or even Canada versus the US, or anything you've seen, Dami, in terms of trust in data and how people are managing those relationships and that exchange of data at a kind of geographic level?
I think the European market demands more data, so they're just used to having that level of transparency or expecting it from the get-go. Again, I'm talking from the consumer side. I think in the United States, it's so much... Oh. I was like, is that it? It's time to wake up. I think in the United States, there's always that, the customer's going to come first. So even if I send something that's wrong or I get something that's wrong, they'll fix it for me. Like, they'll send me a new device, I'll get a refund, like something will get taken care of. So maybe the expectation is a little bit less upstream versus kind of what I've seen in Europe, talking to customers, just from a purchasing behavior.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have as much to do with that end of the market, but in a much earlier life, I worked in those stores. And the one thing that when I was at Vodafone that was constantly told to us is we're in the business of selling airtime. We're not in the business of selling phones. So if we have to discount that phone for a certain amount in order to get a SIM card inside it, so airtime is being spent. So I think there's still a little bit of that mentality that goes on in my parts of the world, where I think including myself probably at some point, I'd send my daughter down to trade in her phone and it might have a big crack in it and just say it's an A grade. And in some respects, if they get away with that because they are actually signing a contract or renewing a contract for more revenue with the carrier, in some respects I can sort of accept that that's okay. Where that problem sits is then when that phone goes to wherever that processing partner is, that data there needs to be accurate, because the person that's buying it on the other end is not putting a SIM card in it and making an annuity out of revenue or anything like that. So I think I definitely think there's a little bit more, they are a little more thorough, certain parts of Europe, and certainly down in my part of the world. But then I think if we had the volume down there, I would be interested to know what the percentage of accuracy is. But because we're seeing a much smaller volume of devices, it looks a lot bigger here.
Understood. Okay, thanks very much. Obviously, EU regulation is saying that you have to have digital product passport, and that's obviously a drive behind what is happening in the industry. How are you thinking about that in terms of even, does it matter what's going on in the EU, or do you think that is good because it's driving the whole importance of DPP more broadly? Generally, what's your thought on that? Braden, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think we're big supporters of the concept. I would say less from a B2B perspective and more from a B2C perspective. But we're also thinking about the digital product passport as part of how we manage our customers' device-oriented lifecycle. So over the course of the contract on a forward buyback where we offer residual value, we actually want to see the customer more often and actually have kind of like the that passport concept to be a reason to come back into the retail shop, re-engage with our reps. It's another opportunity to sell them services that we didn't have a chance to the first time they were in. But then it's also a great opportunity to see what condition they are keeping their device in. A great chance then to sell insurance if we're starting to see problems. And then worst case scenario, it's a great time to kind of set their expectations early that you're probably not going to qualify for the full residual value at the maturity of your contract, to try to avoid the surprises that we see today that leads to the massive churn spikes at the maturity of their forward buyback contract. So for us, it's like it's a great tool to obviously track the device itself, but then also a great tool to influence how we manage the customer.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on that in terms of what's driving the need within the industry for DPP? Regulation is one point, but other factors in terms of your experiences? That was a great experience from a consumer perspective.
I mean, I think it all comes back to transparency. I think there's a need for greater transparency from all the players and everyone that's touching a device throughout its life cycle, and everyone can interpret kind of the information that they need to provide a little bit differently. And I think Europe bringing in some of that infrastructure will help standardize how data is provided and consumed, and ultimately will drive value to not only the players but also the customers and the customer experience. So I think the customer will see it as a benefit to them, and it'll also kind of help elevate the experience by just standardizing how we consume data and the data that we share. Okay,
thanks very much. And I guess maybe Daniel, from your perspective, it might be more from the B2B perspective that you'd like to see it.
Yeah, I think it'll. I think one of the, besides consumer confidence, it'll actually hold value in the devices themselves. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we all face in the business of buying in the secondary market, is the values can be like the stock exchange some days. At least if you can separate devices that don't have that versus ones that do, the customers that you are going to appeal to are going to have a lot more confidence in some of the emerging markets, and parts of Africa and the Caribbean and the Pacific and things, smaller networks that might not be able to go and buy large volumes of 100,000 devices from a manufacturer. They're going to have a level of confidence, if that's in place, to go forward with those types of sales. So I think it's a necessity. It would be good to see it roll out everywhere. But yeah,
I guess the information you might need on a B2B level might be different from a B2C level. It's be the same passport, but it'd be different levels of information. You'd want to know who the refurbishers are, for example. Correct. You wouldn't necessarily care, maybe as a consumer, for that kind of information.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, not as much solely about the device, but maybe also about who was involved in refurbishing the device. And I think it ties back into a lot of the other certification programs that the industry is trying to standardize on. So it's kind of like R2V3 or some of the WISE programs, where you actually what's been done to the device, but then you also know who's done it. And that's a kind of great way to build that trust and quality.
Probably the genuine parts and things as well is a big one.
Yeah, and actually that was one thing I was going to come to, actually. Where do you expect there to be pushback on the idea of DPP? To kind of balance the discussion here, we understand the benefits, I think, but where might you expect some industry pushback on the idea of a DPP?
There's probably a lot of phones that are going to fail, so they'll probably go into a R2 status, so the carriers and mass retail might not get the level of money that they're getting today, but it's gonna make a lot of people a lot happier if they're buying product that they can trust. But I think it's going to come down to, there's a lot of product that is being sold in one stage of grade, and it really isn't that. So I think if it was forced to have a device passport, a lot of them wouldn't pass, in my view. At least they went, but then if they went through, if those phones were then segregated and went through a proper refurbishment process, but the word refurbishment, which you touched on before, it confuses me a lot, because I I consider a refurbishment device something that's actually gone through a refurbishment process. But there seem to be phones now that if they've been diagnostically tested, data wiped, and given a very basic spit and polish, we used to call it in our part of the world, they will market that as a refurbished phone. In my view, that's not a refurbished phone. That's a
I
grade
think
A phone.
that's a fairly recent thing, though, isn't it? And I think that's the way the industry seems to be going. If you're putting a warranty on it,
Yeah.
you've got to have certain processes, and therefore people are calling it a refurbished phone. But that's a fairly new thing, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard the terminology refurbished a lot, and I would assume, like what you were mentioning, that you want to know who's refurbished the device. So I would expect that it's been refurbished to some level, whether it's the battery replacement, the screen replacement, something, but not just diagnostically tested. I would consider that to be a very good secondary device.
Yeah, and I think just back to your Toyota example is
Yeah.
a good one.
Yeah.
You know, that's very clearly a manufacturer that is providing some kind of certification. Obviously, in this business, there's lots of different refurbishing partners. So I think it's a matter of what did they do to the device, who is actually certifying it, under what standard are they certifying it, and it's a great debate, right? Like should a company like TELUS and Mobile Clinic be able to call it a certified pre-owned if it's us doing the work and not the manufacturer doing the work? Like that's one of the great challenges, I think, is just getting lined up on the terminology of who is certifying what and what was actually done to the product. Like for us, it's like 50 or 60% of the devices that we put out there as a finished good certified pre-owned.
Yeah.
We don't call them all refurbished, but 50 to 60% of them clean, clear, buff polish, and they meet one of our finished good grades. So we feel like we can resell it because it meets one of our finished good standards, and then stand behind that product. But yeah, exactly. You know, the language that we're all using and what it means to us is going to be a little different than what it means to other people.
The genuine, non-genuine parts thing, I think, is an interesting one. When you give people the information, they're going to make decisions on that. If you don't give them the information, they're just going to say, I don't even know if it's non-genuine parts, but it's working and it's coming from a good company and it's got a warranty with it. So that, I think, from my perspective, is where there will be some pushback. There's a lot of companies doing very high-quality refurbishing with non-genuine parts. And if you expose that information in a digital product passport, people will say, well, that's a worse quality product, and I'm not going to pay as much for that product, which, by the way, came out in the focus groups as well. We'll talk about tomorrow, but at a high level, people say, "Oh, I don't care if it's I don't care about the parts history quite so much." When you ask them, then, "Oh, well, if you did care about it, do you want genuine or non-genuine?" "Oh, well, we obviously want genuine." So there will be some hesitation, maybe in the short term, of people saying, "Well, suddenly my products are going to be devalued because I'm using." But that's maybe a short-term factor. Fundamentally, this is about raising quality table stakes. Another thing that I just wanted to touch on is about grading standards. Grading standards is something we've talked about a lot. Michelle from CTIA is obviously heavily involved in that topic, and certainly in the US, we are much further advanced here, thanks to the efforts of the CTIA in terms of grading standards. But it's a topic that goes on, and it was a question that was raised when we were doing the intros. Where does that sit alongside the DPP discussion? Is it a kind of a precursor that you've kind of got to have these standards before we think about DPP, so that people can say a grade A cosmetic condition, we know what that means when it's in the DPP? Does DPP replace the discussion? Just kind of curious on where you think those discussions sit alongside. Dami, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I don't think DPP will be the enforcer of a universal grading standard. I think it will help the conversation. Ultimately, DPP will help bring transparency around what's behind that grade that you're seeing on a device. So versus just seeing a grade, you can see what went into that grade. So that's one thing that DPP will help, is building that infrastructure to have those conversations in a more informed way. And then two, what type of grading standard did that device get graded by? So was it a CTIA grade standard? Was it a custom grade standard? So that A needs to be followed by a definition of what that grade was, whether it's CTIA or something else, as well as what's behind that grade. Like, what did you test? What are the images? What did the battery look like? And I think that will kind of help elevate that conversation. And I think that's one of the big pain points around the standardization is that the grades are interpreted wildly different. So this helps abstract the interpretation by providing that data.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense. And Daniel, is that your perception? Because you obviously have this issue dealing across lots of different regions, and it's a challenge you're facing. But where do you see the
Yeah, I agree
importance?
totally with that. I think if people adopt the grading standard that's out there and everyone's going to adopt the same standard and stick to it, then we won't have as big an issue. But the problem is you can have the standards all day long, but if companies are not going to conform to it, then that's where the challenges arise, I think. And then some of the grading that I've observed, which are not the CTIA grading, but other operators and manufacturers' gradings, they're so wide and they use terminology like might have, might this, might that. And so, but you've got no real, you don't know what that percentage, you'd be just as good to go and put money down on the roulette wheel, because it's, you just don't know what you're going to get, and a lot of the time you can't even, inspect these goods until you've paid for them and received them. And so, I think if the grading is adopted and the people selling this product or representing this product stick to it, then it will work.
It comes hand in hand. Okay. And anything to add on that?
I don't like. I think part of the problem here is that you have a mix of art and science, and grading standards, especially from a B2C perspective, are as much about art and kind of marketing the quality of product that you have to sell, whereas something like DPP could be just the science behind it. Instead of trying to call it a standard, like you can have like 3 scratches, it's just a fact, right? It has 3 scratches here, a dent there, batteries at 68%, just the science behind like the product that you're buying. The problem with the standards is it's as much a marketing term as it is like an actual scientific definition, and I think that's where the challenges are. Everybody calls it a little different thing, so you kind of need to be scientific around what it is you're selling.
Yeah.
And every single product is different. Like not one device any of us process is the exact same.
In this kind of desire to make DPP a reality, where do you see the most important initiatives? Obviously, there's the technology providers like Apkudo are playing a very important role. There's EU regulation. Is it collaboration with industry? Is it kind of a bit of a woolly term? But are there certain things you're looking at? Are you looking for more regulation from different parts of the region, different parts of the world, or are you looking for some of the big marketplaces to? Because marketplaces are obviously pretty critical in terms of making this happen, because so much volume is going via those marketplaces. But are you looking to any particular industry or initiative to make this a reality?
Our own grading that we adopt and we sell in all different environments, in the marketplace environments, we've tried to standardize our grading across every country we operate in. And marketplaces is a great example. If you get X amount of returns or customer complaints because you've said it's one thing and it's not, it affects your own seller rankings and everything that goes with that. I'm still learning so much about the market in the US, and whilst I would love to be able to pick up what we've done in our part of the world and just drop it here and say we're going to operate like that, I'm still learning. So there's so many different vendors that are selling product, and all of them are different. And so I would welcome anything that could fix that problem, but how and what that is, all I can talk about is the product that we've seen so far, and product that is going through some of this robotic testing and things like that is proven to be very palatable for us, but other products not so much. So, it's too early for me to really answer that, I think.
That's fine. Okay, understood. And Dami, from your perspective, is there a part of the industry that you think, look, this is going to really move this discussion on quite quickly in terms of DPP adoption?
Yeah, I think data ownership, I think one of the big things that I always get asked in here is, well, why should we give anyone our data for a device passport? Like, it's my data. So I think two things is one, again, just proving the value of why it's important to provide this data from an industry perspective, the value that you're providing to the customer and to the industry, but also ultimately the data is yours. You're just sharing it. So just having a good framework and a good understanding of how that data is shared, what the permissions are. You're not sharing everything. There's no financial liability. You get to choose what you do with the data that you're sharing with Device Passport. Ultimately, we want to elevate the ecosystem as a whole. So I think just being more structured and more informed around what it is that we're doing with the data and why it's valuable to you and to the consumer, and the data is yours. I think that's one of the big things that needs to be spoken about, and we need to just continue educating everyone about for the adoption of Device Passport.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key point, isn't it? The sharing of high quality data between companies. Anything to add on that, Braden?
Well, I was just going to say, like, I don't know how complicated it would be to implement, but I really feel like unless you have incentives or accountabilities in place, it's a very difficult thing to mandate from a data sharing perspective. And I think the question is it the company's data or is it the data of the device itself? And if it's the data of the device itself and it's meant to protect the end consumer, it probably has to be a regulatory policy. Like you're probably not going to get the private sector to acknowledge that and then serve it that way. So,
like a GSMA or something like that, maybe in the middle. Okay, very good. I think I think that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's any questions from the floor for the panelists. I don't think we'd.
Yeah, definitely open it up to questions if anyone has anything they'd like to add or expand on the panel. Thank
No?
you.
Okay.
No? Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Patrick.
Hey, Braden. Your point on valuing a device differently based on how much the customer matters to TELUS, very interesting. I had not heard that before. Like, where are you at in that process? Is that something you guys are working on? Is that already built into the trade-in values you might offer in Mobile Clinic? And I just would like to hear more about that.
yes, still working on it. So it's an idea that we have in our kind of device-oriented customer journey mandate that we're just embarking on. We're going through a significant reorg at the moment, so that's lots of fun. But yeah, it's one of the ideas around what a telco can do differently. There's not too many rocks to look under as a telco for margin, especially in an industry in Canada that's been competitively compressed recently. So the device, how we manage the customer vis-a-vis their device, what standards we hold them to at point of renewal or acquisition, I think really needs to depend on the value that they're bringing to our core business, which is obviously the services side. And then by no means would we value that device we took from the customer differently when we take our action on it. The widget is worth whatever it's worth. But in terms of the value that we offer to the customer based on their propensity to activate, renew, or add services, I think we're going to want to have that be a dynamic capability. So high value customer, we probably want to be a lot more lenient. Lower value customer, we can probably be a little bit more strict. But having the ability to know is an important factor in our decision making.
Anyone
Very
else?
good.
No?
No? Okay, should we bring it to a close?
Yes, we will, and we'll get to hear more from you, Simon, tomorrow with the consumer research that we're starting. So you've kind of planted the seed for more to come. So thank you. Thank you for all your candid perspectives. I really appreciate it. Super important.